Hi there, brothers. Thank you so much for taking a moment to tune into this recorded session. This is about running an effective meeting. Whether you're the new sage of your chapter or a committee member who's looking to get a new philanthropy project off the ground, or perhaps maybe it's your ACE project or planning of that next social, meetings are a mainstay that we're going to see throughout our chapter experience and even beyond that into our professional world. So running an effective meeting is crucial and a great way to move those things forward. My name is Quentin Groce. I am a Michigan Province Archon, but feel free to call me Q. And I'm so excited to be able to be here with you guys today. And if you have any questions on the content that's presented, don't hesitate to reach out. I love helping our chapters continue to succeed. I wanted to start the conversation off with a quote, and it's the key to leadership is accomplishing the tasks at hand while building relationships. This is key because we are a social organization. So we want to get business done. We want to complete tasks. We want to have those items that are going to move our chapter forward. But we also want to do it while building relationships. And so if you are leading a meeting, guess what? You're a leader. So I like to start with this one. If you have any interest in reading a little bit more on leadership, this comes from my favorite book from James C. Hunter, known as The Servant. So what are those meeting best practices? A couple of these items we're going to dive a little bit deeper into, but here's the overview. Publish your agenda before the meeting. If you are having your chapter meeting, I recommend that the chapter sages put that agenda out and what you plan on discussing at the meeting at least 48 hours beforehand. And also put a cap in there if brothers want to get their name on the agenda. Make sure they know that they can't get on the agenda if they don't meet that 48-hour window. Know the meeting room and space that you're going to be in, the tech that exists, the way that it is laid out to ensure that you have a conducive meeting. If you're going to be virtual, be comfortable with the controls that the platform has to offer and make sure that you're not finding yourself in a tech nightmare. Follow the agenda that you set up before that meeting. And then lastly, start and end your meeting on time. We'll talk a little bit more about those items later, but as we move in, we're going to talk very briefly about the agenda. Here is a core bare bones agenda with nothing in it. The agenda is the path. It's the map that we're going to be following for that time period. You'll recall that I said start and end your meeting on time. Our chapters have had a past of starting their meeting. It's supposed to start at 6 o'clock, but realistically, we started at 6:15 because a couple of guys were late and they knew they were coming, or whatever the reason is. You want to always start that meeting on time and end that meeting on time because it gives a sense of accountability. No one likes that meeting that they go into thinking it's going to be 45 minutes, and guess what? Now I'm here for 3 hours. It begins leaves a bad taste in the mouth of your members. So I always recommend doing that. The agenda is that map. It's the way that we're going to be able to get there and start it at 6 o'clock and end at 7, for example. Looking at something that's filled out a little bit more, here's an example of what that agenda might look like. You're going to have that call to order right at the time that you said your meeting was going to start. Whether those members are there or not, bring that meeting to order right at that time you started. You're going to approve your agenda. You're going to approve the previous minutes. Your executive board is going to give their reports. And then prime example, we talked about making sure that you have that agenda out 48 hours beforehand. If you've got your social chair that wants to talk about that social that you guys are going to be having with Tri-Delt, or you want to talk about your orchid ball, those items should be placed on your agenda. Old business, that's if they've previously talked about it in another meeting and perhaps it was tabled. New business is going to be those things that are new items that have not been discussed yet within your meeting. So make sure you manage this agenda because, again, it's going to be that roadmap to know what you need to do. For example, if you have a set time that you want to have that meeting, you know how long it takes to get through these different items. If you're full, guess what? You're going to have to make sure that let those members know that they might be placed on the next meeting because you don't have any more room for new business. Again, it's a great way to manage that map and how you're going to be going. Next up, let's talk about the environment. Setting up your meeting and how it's going to be set up, whether you're virtual or in person, is going to be very, very key. we can't have an environment, and I used an example of a farmer. If you have dry, barren land that has all rocky and it's not conducive to be able to grow that plant, guess what? You're not going to be able to grow plants. The same thing goes with our meetings. If the environment is not set up to have a conducive meeting, or rather it's not set up to be conducive for your meeting and the meeting and the topics that you're going to be talking, we need to make sure we set that up in that way. So how does your meeting room look? Does it look like the one on the top left where you're all kind of facing forward towards the executive board and you're in rows? Does it look like the one at the bottom where half of the guys are probably wearing letters or stumbled down from their room in the house, and you got some guys in formal attire, pin attire? Keep in mind, with our meetings, at least for your chapter meeting, you should be wearing pin attire, which is a collared shirt at all times. Or does it look like the far right, where it looks like maybe this thing just kind of popped up randomly? Before this, we were playing Call of Duty, and now, oh, it's time for us to have the meeting. Well, guys, let's talk real quick about this. How does your meeting room look? It should be the same place at the same time every time you meet, specifically talking about chapter meetings. Chairs, that's a whole nother story, but talking about the formal chapter meeting, we want to have that be at the same place, the same time, in the same room, preferably, if possible. Smaller chapters, generally those below 40, we can use what we would call a horseshoe style. Your board is up on the front of the room, but then everybody that's in the room is spread around a seat. This provides a atmosphere where everyone can see each other and interact with each other in a better way. Not only are you able to see what your fellow members are doing within the meeting, you're also able to hear what they're trying to say as they're talking about the various different motions. The key to setup is having that order. Make sure you know the way that your room is actually going to physically be set up. And do you need a projector? Do those items work? Have you done a walkthrough of that room to make sure it's going to be conducive for it? There's many rooms on your campus, right? And I've seen chapters go from a 20-man chapter where the horseshoe worked to now they're large enough that they could fill a whole lecture hall. Work with your campus to be able to find the best room that's going to fit you and your meeting that you're trying to have. The next thing is obviously we had an impact this past year through the global pandemic, through COVID-19, and that pushed everybody online. We're talking Forbes 500 companies, Fortune 500 companies, to your little mom and pop meetings that are for nonprofits. So we know how we can set it up in person, but let's say that we can't do it in person. We want to do it online. There's still some things that we want to consider as we're looking at what that meeting room is going to be looking like. So what are those best practices for having that online meeting? When we've got this many cameras on and this many people in the meeting, as you can see on the slide, it can get a little bit hectic. But how do we have that order? One, the mute all is going to be your biggest friend in this situation. There should only realistically be one, maybe two mics unmuted at any given time. And that is the person that has the floor. Manage a speakers list. Whether you're using the chat or you're using reactions within your meeting, and have that list be managed so you know whose mic should be unmuted next if you're having a discussion. If you're having larger meetings, potentially it's your chapter's planning meeting or whatnot, can you leverage breakout rooms to be able to provide a better experience where it allows more people to contribute to the conversation? In addition, try and keep those meetings, if you're going to be doing something online, to 45 to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Don't go really much longer than that, if at all possible. And again, that's where the agenda is going to come into play, to knowing how much information you can get through in that time frame that you're trying to end the meeting by. When it comes to controlling the meeting, here is the biggest tip that I can offer. People vary in their technology ability or the technology that they want to understand, right? So whether you're using Zoom or Discord or Google Meet, I would urge you as the chair of the meeting to really understand how that platform is going to be working. Do you know how to do a sharing of your screen? Do you know how to give other people control? Are you managing the chat? Do you know how to mute people? Do you know how to unmute them or ask them to unmute? All of these things are going to be key. And if you don't feel comfortable running those items, what I would recommend that you do is you find somebody who could be a co-host within that meeting and allow them to be almost as if it's your sergeant at arms, right? Who is supposed to be the parliamentarian in the chapter, but find somebody who's really good with these items, putting up the different slides, muting or unmuting individuals, managing polls. And perhaps you could even make it, a subcommittee of a chair within your chapter. But if you do not feel comfortable with managing that meeting, find somebody else who you trust, who you can give that co-host ability to. So running your meeting. There's a variety of different ways that people can run their meeting. We talked about the agenda, we talked about the layout, but running your meeting, there's a number of different ways that we can do it. And one of the things that we recommend is leveraging, and if you've ever been to a convocation for the chapter, or rather for the fraternity, you've seen Robert's Rules of Order, or another word for this is parliamentary procedure. There's actually a couple of different versions of parliamentary procedure, but for the sake of this conversation today and what we use at convocation, it's Robert's Rules of Order. And really, realistically, what Robert's Rules of Order is, it's a time-tested method of conducting business, including motions and a speaker's list, and moving things forward at a nice pace, so you can really, truly control how that meeting is going to move. Organizations have been using Robert's Rules of Order for many, 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 many years. So who really is using this kind of platform? And the thing I can see you saying is this really going to be relevant to me, Q, after I get out of school and I'm no longer within the chapter? And the answer is absolutely yes. Parliamentary procedure is used in corporate boardrooms for voting. It's used in the government, whether you're talking on a local basis of a city commissioner to the state government that you have, or even Congress, House and the Senate. Excuse me. Community committees, PTA, for example, if you end up having kids, and those school or nonprofit boards that you might be asked to sit on. But again, those parliamentary procedure things is going to be able to help you control that meeting, especially when we have, as the example on that photo, a large meeting like Congress. We need to have some systems in place. And if you're managing, whether you're managing 20 men in your chapter or 150, we want to make sure that there is order and you're able to do that. So what do those basics look like? The 6 basic items would be making a motion, ensuring that the chair restates that motion, and then we move into the expansion on the motion, or the discussion. So the member will expand once it is voted to yes, they can talk about it. They're going to share a little bit of why it is that they actually physically put this motion forward and why they feel it's relevant. Then you move into question and answer. These question and answer and the discussion are going to be time blocks. So I encourage you to set a time that works well for your chapter. So how would this go, right? Example, you've got a motion that's been on the table. You've restated that motion. Someone's voted to say, yep, let's talk about it. We're now going to be moving into 5 minutes of question and answer, and that time begins now. You, as the chair of that meeting, you need to make sure that you are physically tracking that time. You don't want to be off of that time. You want to make sure that you keep to those 5 minutes. When that timer goes off, conversation stops. You can move to extend it if you want, but again, this keeps time blocks on, and it doesn't allow brothers or the members of the meeting to run on and go on for on and on and on and on and on. So set time limits for what you're going to be doing. I recommend generally 2 to 3 minutes for question and answer and 5 minutes on discussion. Again, discussion is going to be the spot where we're not asking questions, but we're voicing our opinion on the motion that has been put on the table. I like this thing. I don't like this thing. We're spending too much money here. We're not spending quite enough money here. An example on that. And then lastly, call to question. When you feel that this motion has been probably talked about enough, if your name is on the speaker's list, if it comes to you and you feel no further discussion is really needed, you could say, call to question. And that essentially means bringing this conversation, the question, i.e. the motion, to a close. And then brothers would vote on it at that point. So those are the keys and the basics to looking at parliamentary procedure. Now, we talked about call to question just a moment ago. When someone calls the question, what they're saying is, I think we've heard enough and I'm ready to vote on this. If there's no objection to calling the question, you would move right into that motion's vote. And there's a couple of ways that you can vote on a motion. You could do it via voice. You could do it via roll call if you want to have and capture the vote of every single one of your members. That's very rare within our chapters, but it does exist. I've seen it be used in haven't read you have to go through this experience, but the expulsion of a member or something really, really important to your chapter, a roll call vote could be called. General consent. The way you'll see consent being called, or rather general consent, is someone will say, after the chair says, all right, we're going to be voting on this motion, all those in favor, someone could say consent after or consent right away. Essentially what you're saying is, I'm reading the room and the room pretty much all feels like I do that we're moving this thing forward. If that's called and there's no objection to calling the consent, that motion passes. You could also have, this isn't a way you vote on it, but let's say that the vote is extremely split when you're doing a voice vote. It's not really clear who the winner is. Someone at that point would call division, which means we need to really truly understand what that vote was. It wasn't clear by our voice. In that way, that we would move to a hand vote or another formation or another form of voting. And then last but not least, you have a secret ballot. For those that we want to hide the anonymity of who it is and how they're voting, you would use a secret ballot or a piece of paper and then those tallies. Most common that we see the secret ballot being used is executive board elections. Because we may or may not want to share who it is or that we're voting for or why that we're voting for it. So it keeps and allows us as brothers to vote on very, very important business, but not necessarily share how we feel on a specific topic. Within the resources that you're going to find here within MYLC and specifically in this course, there is a Robert's Rules of Order cheat sheet that we've included, and that's what's pictured on the slide right now. So if you're looking at giving this to brothers or rather leveraging Robert's Rules of Order within your meeting and it's not something you've done before, this is a really amazing tool to be able to provide your members so they can kind of understand when they should do something and when they shouldn't. And of course, make Robert's Rules of Order a little bit your own. One of the things that we see common within our chapters is when it comes to amendments, which requires, if you were to do a real amendment, it requires an additional vote on top of the motion. And it can get a little bit muddy. And I completely understand because I was there when I first started using Robert's Rules of Order within my chapter. So if I put a motion forward, we've moved to have that discussion. And let's say during the discussion piece of it, somebody says, I'd like to move to amend this motion. That would require actually a whole additional another vote. So you're voting on the amendment, yes or no to have it, and then you would move back into the original motion. One of the ways that our chapters get around that, because they don't necessarily want to have a record of every single one of those votes like the Senate would, for example. What you would do is you would say, I'd like to make a friendly amendment, which doesn't require there to be a vote. However, the person who can choose to accept or decline the friendly amendment would be that person that put the motion forward originally. I have an additional learning item where we actually go through the process of passing a Rush t-shirt using Robert's Rules of Order. So if you're interested in seeing that in action, be sure to tune into that additional piece as well. I know that a couple of chapters have found it to be really, really eye-opening or helpful to be able to see it in action or an example. So as we move it towards the end of this presentation here, what are some extra credit items or ways that you could level up your next meeting? If you implemented everything that we talked about before, fantastic. But ways that we can level that up would be using a gavel. Bringing a gavel to your meeting is going to be able to call that chapter to order or be able to tap it to stop the room from getting out of order. Now, wouldn't necessarily need a gavel in a online meeting, but in person, absolutely. If you're in person, name tags. Or if you're not using name tags, encourage brothers to update their name within the meeting to how brothers know them, perhaps. If you've got a nickname or you just choose to put your first and last name, all I would recommend at that point is standardization across the board when you're using those name tags or name placards. Printed agendas is another great way to have something physical at your meeting. Or if that's not the case, again, virtual. Have a place where your brothers can go and they know where they can pull up the agenda for that next week. Maybe it's your Google Drive or a OneDrive. Some brothers use Blackboard that's been awarded to their school and they're able to use for student organizations. Do you have a projector in your room? Again, that's a physical meeting, right? To be able to put things up on a screen where everybody can see it and we know that we're on the same page. It's a great way to vote on bylaws or constitutional changes within your chapter. Prepare or rather bring in pre-printed reports or have them available and you can reference them on the drive in the meeting. I don't always recommend cell phones in the meeting because obviously that can get a little bit cumbersome. If somebody's going to be doing a bunch of different Tinder swipes or whatnot, we want to keep the meeting really truly to the meeting. But another great way that I've seen brothers use it is iPads in the meeting. They're able to pull up what that agenda looks like and how it goes. Another way to level up your meeting is bringing in special guests. And that brings us, gentlemen, to the end of our awesome little recap here on how to have a successful meeting. Again, my name is Quentin Groce, or Q for short. If there's anything I can do to help you guys in your chapter have better meetings, please don't hesitate to reach out. And until next time, have a great day, and I believe.